Okay, here we're going to go with some additional subnetting problems. We're going to have 3 different ones. And this is for February 8th that was recorded earlier. And what I want you to do on each of these is figure out what ID, network ID, that particular IP address that's been highlighted in yellow belongs to by using the CIDR notation. I need you to answer network ID, first usable, last usable, and broadcast. What I would suggest, you look at this, pause the video, do your calculations, and then finish the video to see if you got your answers correct. And eventually we will go on to more difficult ones. All right, so here we're going to go with 183.214.93.59 with a /28. Obviously, we're working in the 4th octet, so we're going to make changes here. Well, we have to determine what network 59 belongs to. Well, if we go up to /28, we notice it goes up by 16s, okay? And I've left this chart here, so it's going to make it a little bit easier to get this started. So, I tell you, always start out at .0. So we're going to use the first 3 octets that are not going to change. So it's 183.214.93.0, and we said we're going to go up by 16, so we're going to add in 16. And I got to remember when that does that, that pulls that over. Okay, so we're at 16. 59 does not fall in between the two, so we're going to go to another 16 we're going to add. That 16 is going to be 32. Now with the 59 does not fall between the 16 and 32. And I can't emphasize this enough. Remember, these are network IDs we are working with. So let's add in another 16. And we end up at 48. Okay, well 59 does not fall in there, so looks like we're going to have to add in another 16. So since we're going to add in another 16, we're at 183.214.93.64. Now, 59 does fall between those two. So remember, the IP address has to be higher than the network ID, but has to be lower than the next network ID. These are network IDs. It falls between 48 and 64. Remember, I told you to put up like a gold post, so here we go. The .48 is part of the network that 59 belongs to, and 64 is the very next one. Everything falls in between here where the 59 will. So we know our network ID is 48. The first usable has to be one higher than the network ID, which is 49. Go down to the broadcast. Broadcast has to be one less than the next network ID. That's why I write both those numbers there to help you. And that's 63, because 64 minus 1, 63. And the last usable has to be one less than the broadcast. So we have network IDs even, broadcast is odd. We have 16 usable IP, or 16 IP addresses, only 14 are usable. Right, now on to the next problem. Now this one, 129.63.48.76. And we're using a /26. So we look at our chart and we see that we go up by 64s. So it's not going to be too hard to do on this one. We're going to start out at .0. And of course, we're going to have to add in 64. And sometimes that will fall into the very first 2 that you put. Sometimes it's way down the path, just depending on. So here we go, 64. And nope, 76 does not fall in between those two, so we have to add in another 64. 64 plus 64 is 128. And 76 does fall between 64 and 128. These are network IDs. Remember, the network ID has to be an even number. So we put the 64 here. This is inside the gold post. The 128 is outside of it. And in here, we have all the different IP addresses that are going to be part of this subnet. So we know the network ID is 64. First usable has to be one higher, so we're going to go with 65. Jump down to the broadcast. The broadcast has to be one less than the next network ID, and it has to be odd, so it's got to be 127. And the last usable has to be one less than the broadcast, so we have 126. And 76 does fall in this range. So we have 64 IP addresses, 62 are usable, sorry for the ding ding. That's emails coming in. And network ID is even, broadcast is odd. Let's move on to the next one. I figured I was working at home, I wouldn't have the emails coming in, but I forget sometimes they do ping at night. All right. So we're on to the next one. And I need to adjust it just a little bit so I can get everything in here. So we're dealing with 114.78.213.46 with a /27. Let's find what network that .46 belongs to. So we know it's a /27. We go up here to our chart, goes up by 32s. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put, as we've done all along, put that 0 in there and add in 32. What we add to it never changes. Remember that. 32. Well, 46 does not fall between 0 and 32, so obviously we need to add another 32. And we'll come down here, and we got 64. Well, I look up, 46 falls between 32 and 64. Again, we're working with network IDs. If you can get that concept, that's going to help you a great deal. Well, we know that the 32 is the one that is lower than 46, so that's the one on the left side of the goalpost, okay? The one that's outside of it is the next higher one, which is 64, which we can't, that's a completely different network. Right, so here we go. Now we're looking at this, and we got network ID is .32. First usable has to be one higher than the network ID, which is going to be 33. The broadcast has got to be one less than the next network ID, and it's got to be an odd number, so it's 63. And the last usable has to be one less than the network, the broadcast, and it's 62, okay? So you got the network IDs even, broadcast is odd. You got a total of 32 IP addresses, 30 usable. So just remember, network ID is always the lowest at first, and it is an even number. The first usable is always an odd number. It's one higher than the network ID. The broadcast is the last number in the subnet. It's always odd. Last usable is always one less than the broadcast, and it is always an even number. All right, thank you. We'll have more tomorrow.